Hi everyone. I was just going to work with John today and just ask him a few questions just to get more information for all of you out there about the machine. So I suppose, John, what does the system actually entail?
The system entails a driver-facing camera, which is an infrared low-intensity IR camera, which operates in all lighting conditions and will look through things like sunglasses to monitor the driver's faces, etc. There's a forward-facing camera, which will then possibly exonerate anybody from what's happening on the road in front of them. There is a vibration motor which is fitted underneath the seat of the driver for in case when activation occurs. And there is a processor which is basically the brains of the device, which then encrypts the data and stores it for if necessary.
So how are all the objectives of the system achieved?
Basically manages driver fatigue and distraction. If the infrared camera once the driver's in his seat, it will draw up an algorithm of the driver's face, focusing on the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. And then these thresholds are then set into the system in the processor. And if the driver's eyes are closed for a certain amount of time, or the head moves out of a certain rotation, not looking at the road, then an audible alert or vibration will trigger. And depending on the configuration from the company, this event is classified and pushed back to the company.
You just mentioned that there was like configurations from the company, but are there like default parameters that are set up within the system?
There are default parameters based on about 5 billion kilometers of travel done being monitored by seeing machines. The default parameter is eye closure for more than 1.5 seconds at above 10 kilometers an hour. And for distraction, not looking ahead for more than 4 seconds above 40 kilometers an hour. Those are the defaults which have been worldwide proved to be the most effective.
And you said about the companies configuring, so these aren't fixed parameters?
No, they're not fixed parameters. It all depends on the companies. When the devices are installed in the vehicle, our support department actually discusses the uses with the companies and decide what is actually the best for that company. We do have a couple of companies who move, for example, the distraction out from 4 seconds slightly longer because they need to look at their load constraints for a longer period or something. So no, those are individually defined by an agreement with the support department.
Cool. So when the device has an event, how are the events monitored?
If for example, it's a fatigue event or the driver closed their eyes for more than 1.5 seconds, that data is captured and is pushed through to a control center, where there are 2 control centers. There's one in Tucson in America and one in Canberra. That footage is then actually viewed by a human and is then classified either as fatigue, might be distraction, might actually even be classified as normal driving, and normal driving will go no further.
And when it does detect fatigue, what's the next step?
If there is fatigue detected, the fatigue can be different levels of fatigue. You can get a microsleep, where there is a definite eye closure, often the neck muscles relax and the head will drop. So that would actually be classified as a microsleep, which is probably the worst one you can have. It just fatigue is a general sort of slow eye closure or a rapid eye closure. But the control center will actually look at those and verify them as to what they determine from the footage they see, as to what if it's a fatigue event. And as I say, if it's a fatigue event, a phone call will go through to a predetermined list as agreed by the company and our support department. And on that list, it'll go down. The first person on the list will get a phone call. If they're not available, go to the second person, etc. down the line until somebody can actually be contacted. An email will also go out to all those people on the list who've actually been asked to accept an email. And that email will show the time that it happened, the total length of eye closure, the distance traveled with eye closed, what speed the vehicle was going at, etc. And a map reference point as well as to where it actually happened.
And And so it measures fatigue, and it also, it determines fatigue and also distractions. What does it actually, how does it determine a distraction? What is the distraction determination?
Distraction, as I say, if the head is out of a certain rotation for more than 4 seconds above 40 kilometers an hour, it will trigger an audible alert, not a vibration, unless the camera cannot see the driver's eyes because the head is turned to that extent. If it's just an audible alert, that will also get verified by the control center. And if there's mobile phone can be seen in the footage, it'll actually come back as mobile phone use. Otherwise, if they're looking in their lunchbox or looking at a map or something for longer than 4 seconds, that will purely go out in a report, or if requested, it can be sent as an email, but there won't be a phone call for distraction. But an email can go out for either mobile phone use or distraction, depending on what the company wants.
And so getting back to the fatigue then, can the drivers manage their own fatigue?
Not at all. It's actually a myth. There's a very good book by a professor from America who says that fatigue, we cannot manage our own fatigue. It's a myth. And people cannot catch up on sleep. We can't say, right, I had a long day yesterday, I'm going to catch up on some sleep. Sleep cannot be caught up on. So, no, we cannot maintain and manage our own fatigue. It doesn't happen.
And I suppose then it begs to ask the question, if we've got this technology in the trucks, is that going to replace the needs for parking areas and stopping areas and things like that?
No, definitely not. If a fatigue event was to occur, that driver needs to pull up at the nearest possible rest point. What will probably happen is that the technology will actually be used to determine where more rest points actually need to be had and place more than less rest points on the road.
And I mean, these are really well designed, and obviously there's a lot of big companies that use them, but are they mainly used in line haul vehicles?
No, you'll find that it's used a lot in line haul vehicles, but line haul vehicles, fatigue happens in the first, probably in the first 30 to 90 minutes of a journey. And we've actually had one of our own members of staff after 28 minutes having a fatigue event. It has been recorded up as low as 11 minutes after the start of a journey. So no, definitely not. It can be any vehicle. Fatigue seems to peak at about between 3 and 5 in the morning, slightly, but otherwise it's fairly even across a curve the whole day. Fatigue occurs virtually 24 hours of the day.
And you're mentioning before about how it picks up the fatigue, and it records a little bit of a video snippet, doesn't it? What's the importance of having that video?
The importance of the video is most people won't believe that they've actually had a fatigue event until they actually view the footage. So the fatigue event, that footage is captured in the system, which then can be viewed through a secure portal with obviously limited access to those who've got authority to look at it. And they can actually then, if necessary, call the driver and have a look and say, look, you've had a fatigue event. If they say, no, I haven't, it's a game changer when they actually see that video and don't realize that they've actually had a fatigue event. You'll find that most long-haul drivers will admit that they've actually had a fatigue event and had a micro sleep during the journey.
And, the systems that we run, obviously, there's some mobile phone coverage that allows the uploading of information. But what happens when a vehicle is actually outside of mobile phone coverage when there's an event?
The driver will still get that alert in the vehicle at the time of the incident. So either vibration or audible or both. But if the vehicle is outside of mobile phone range, that data cannot get pushed through until the vehicle regains coverage. As soon as it regains coverage, that footage will be viewed and the phone call, etc., would go out, unless the vehicle has been out of coverage for more than 12 hours, because then it's determined that should be in a new shift. So that driver would not be driving. But the policies the company's put in place say, right, if the vibration motor goes off, you need to stop the vehicle, get out, kick the tires, have a drink of water, whatever. It's up to companies to determine their individual policies.
And sort of, I mean, this is pretty amazing technology and we're big fans, but where does it come from? Where does the technology actually come from?
Technology was actually developed in Canberra, so it's an Australian product, and they are specialised in algorithms with looking at vision, etc. And the technology is now being used in aircraft simulators. It's being used in ferries, in buses, in trains, all sorts of things. Where some of the biggest customers that are using the technology now, the likes of Caterpillar, the London Bus Company, Emirates. So a lot of very big companies are actually taking on the technology and running with it.
With safety being such an integral part of transport industry and drivers' behaviours on the roads and things determining their safety focus, do you know if there have been incidents where drivers have actually been dismissed due to any fatigue events?
Not to my knowledge. We have had some incidents where drivers have been picked up to have a sleep apnea or a sleep disorder, who've actually been pulled off the road by the company and actually gone through a series of medical things to get them back on the road again. But no, to my knowledge, nobody's actually been dismissed for having a fatigue event.
Mm-hmm. Now, MGM have a few different branches, and I know you've got a nice little setup that we can work with that. Can you explain to us how that sort of works when you run different fleets of vehicles within your business?
Yeah, within a business, you can have as many different fleets as you like, and with different levels of access to each one of those fleets. So you can have different divisions within your business, having viewing only certain vehicles in the fleet. So it all depends. You can have an overarching admin looking at them all, and you can have it split up in fleets. So if you've got vehicles in the Pilbara and you've got things in the southwest, they can actually split the whole fleet as how they like, and they can move the vehicles from one to the other.
Mm-hmm. So there's a whole range of benefits, obviously, you've spoken about, but apart from those obvious benefits in looking after the drivers, are there any other benefits that you get from installing these devices?
Yeah, NTI Insurance, who are the biggest insurance involved in the trucking industry, have actually come to the party with us, where they are looking at to review people's subscriptions, and we actually have people with a reduction of up to 30%. They look at reduction of the excess up to $2,500. They remove certain driver restrictions. So in this time of driver shortages, you can get younger drivers, etc., in behind the wheel. They'll pay market value plus up to the settlement can be 20% above the up to the maximum sum insured. And NTR realised that having these devices in the vehicle is actually going to lower the accident rate. So that's why one of the reasons why they've come to the party. But the data that they gather is purely used for statistics. They cannot use the data against a particular company. They don't get access to that. They just get access to the statistics.
Well, that's really great. So do you have any statistics then on the cost of an accident to the transport company?
We have got some statistics that actually came out in the last week or so, which was actually quite scary. And there was a report done by a company, a group called RERA, and they're saying you got your physical costs, such as your cargo damage, your vehicle damage, your injury costs, your loss of revenue, your insurance costs, your towing costs, the storage of damaged vehicles, etc. But then you've got your hidden or indirect costs, which include your loss of customers, loss of sales, your salaries to injured employees, cost to hire a replacement vehicle, poor public relations, increased public relation costs and government agency costs. But apart from that, your social media can have a very big detrimental effect on a company if there's an accident or an incident involving a vehicle.
I think we've all seen that from time to time with some of the posts. So how much revenue is lost on average?
There was a business report stated that the average cost of a vehicle accident is about $148,000. And that came from research done across Australia. And what they're saying that a lot of companies, if you're operating on a margin of about 2%, to recover that cost, you're going to need to have a turnover of about $7.5 million just to recoup that cost of that incident. And if there was a fatality, it would be a lot higher. So the cost of an accident can directly affect the company's bottom line and very badly, in fact, influence it.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
My pleasure. But now then, now people sort of possibly got a bit of a better idea of the product. Let's sort of rather go back to yourself and ask how things are happening with MGM, and we'll just see. How have your drivers accepted the having the DSSI units in your road trains, etc.
Well, look, to be honest, at first there was a little apprehension from some of them. And I think some of them thought there was like this big brother setup, watching them while they're driving. But as you said earlier, you can't tap into the camera to actually watch the driver live. Once they realised that we couldn't watch them and that they were installed purely for their own safety, that's when they really grew to appreciate them. So it also sort of strengthened, after they experienced how effective they were at alarming for the fatigue events.
And what do you mean by appreciate them?
It's funny because even though they saw they were apprehensive, as I mentioned, they did soon see the value of having them in the trucks. And that was because I think not a lot of them realised they were having those fatigue events. And now we have most drivers of our fleet will not leave the depot without having them installed and having them working correctly, because they've all experienced firsthand how beneficial they really are at detecting fatigue, and also how they're contributing to supporting the driver staying awake and alert while they're operating our road trains.
Do you think has the system actually reduced fatigue in your drivers?
I wouldn't say it's actually reduced fatigue, but it's definitely allowed the drivers to become more aware of their own fatigue, and also allowing that awareness to help them better manage their fatigue strategies better. So this then reduces the events further on that they're having. In fact, when we first had them installed, we had numerous fatigue events, and it was pretty scary really to think of how many close calls were happening that no one really knew anything about. So once we showed the drivers the footage recorded in the web-based program, they were able to actually recognise their early signs. And once they recognised their early signs, they were then better able to manage their fatigue on a personal level. So they also had the knowledge of their actions leading up to an event, and they get to see their own personal behaviours. So I suppose for me, as an example, I know when I'm getting tired because I tend to sit back in my chair and I tend to do like that in the car. And so as soon as I do that, I then realise that I've got to actually do something about stopping, having a break, especially if I've been driving for a long time. So by giving them that knowledge as well, that strategy then allowed them to recognise their own signs. They could pull over, have a break, and that was happening before they actually got to the point where they were having an event. Some were actually shocked, really, and like you mentioned before, they don't even realise they're having an event. So they were shocked to see themselves and realise that they'd actually closed their eyes while they were driving.
And how does MGM actually manage the fatigue if there's a fatigue event?
Well, like you mentioned earlier, John, the supervisor receives a phone call from the call centre and the operations centre after that event's been classified as a true fatigue event. And at that point, our supervisors reach out to the drivers and check it just to make sure they're okay. We have a formal procedure in place on how we manage the events, and that starts off with the first event being a check-in by the supervisor. If there's a second event in a single shift, then the supervisor contacts the driver, and the driver takes a mandatory 20-minute break at the next rest stop to make sure that they can have that break and do a little bit of fatigue management strategy, whether that's a sleep or a kick the tyres or something to get them back on track. And this happens regardless of how they're feeling at the time. Because sometimes as well, and I know we've all done it, we've been driving, we think, no, we're okay. And then we have those signs. So you just never really know. Yeah. And then we make sure obviously they're recharged before they return to the wheel. And in rare cases where there is actually a third event, then we get them to pull over and we swap them out with an alternative driver. So it's not really that common for us to have the 3 events in one shift. In fact, with the size of our fleet and the number of drivers we have, we've only had 3 occasions of this happening this year. And I'm sure other companies as well have different stats for their events. But, each company can manage their events in a way that suits their business. So there's no wrong or right way, but we find that that's an effective strategy for MGM.
What are you doing? Are you using it for distraction and mobile phone, possible mobile phone use as well?
Yeah. Look, we use, we'll use any tools that come at us. So yeah, we definitely get in there and have a look at that. And early on when they were first installed, again, we had quite a few distraction events. Our drivers are out on the open road. So it's pretty easy, easy to take your eyes off the road and start looking around when you're driving. But as the drivers become more familiar with the system, they then begin to train themselves to look ahead at the road in more regular intervals. That one stops the machine from setting off, and also that brings their attention back to what they're doing. So it's been a great tool in helping the drivers to always maintain their focus on the road ahead. We also do use the cell phone events that are detected by the machines. And we also use some of these detections to detect some of the bad habits that people are using. So like mobile phones and, if there's a seatbelt issue and those sort of things. Although there aren't that many, it has actually allowed MGM to ensure our drivers are operating their trucks in a safe manner when they're out on the road. And it also establishes better habits that they can hopefully take back into their own personal light vehicles. And so hopefully then we're protecting them and their families even outside the workplace.
And am I correct in saying that MGM has now installed this system in all your vehicles?
Yeah, we did. We started off by installing them in our Northwest fleet, primarily due to the remote nature of the work and the rolling shift structure. So we saw a higher risk of fatigue up there, and that's why we did it. But it didn't take us long to see that they were adding a lot of value to the business, and the directors then had them installed across our whole fleet. So even our trucks that do the short runs in the Southwest, we still have them installed there. And now every truck we have on the road has a unit fitted, and any new trucks entering the fleet, as you know, are fitted with a unit prior to their first trip out on the road.
And what about your light vehicles? Are you doing anything with the light vehicles?
Yeah, so again, due to the remote nature of the work in the Northwest, we've also had them installed in all of our light vehicles and all of our service vehicles. So any light vehicle that goes in excess of 30 kilometres from Port Hedland, if they're travelling to a client site or attending breakdowns and things like that, they must have a unit installed. And also it's essential to check those units and the unit operations as part of our pre-start on our journey management plan. So if there's no unit in the vehicle or if it's not working correctly, then the vehicle's not permitted to actually do that journey. And the team have to seek an alternative vehicle before they go out. Now, we don't really have many events from the light vehicles, but in our opinion, if it prevents just one incident, then obviously it's worth having in the light vehicles up there as well.
Okay, so sort of summarising, what are the sort of benefits that you're really seeing through having the Guardian devices through your fleet?
I think ultimately they give the business and the drivers the confidence that any fatigue issues that they're having are detected early and are able to be addressed before an actual incident occurs. Our team's made up of professional drivers like most of the companies out there, and they do take a lot of pride in what they do. So the last thing they want to do is be responsible for any major incidents or, in a worst case scenario, injuries to themselves or other road users. We also have had some people that we've actually have picked up some medical issues with them. There was just one that I was speaking with one of our team today who's just come back, had quite a few events, and so we sent them for a medical, and we found out that they need to have some treatment done to try and help them with some other stuff that then was affecting their fatigue. So it's been helpful there too. We've also been able to use as distraction events and cell phone events that have come up to target some education to some particular drivers to help them change some behaviours and maybe some bad habits, which contributes to reducing the risk of incidents occurring on the road. And, ultimately it gives the business peace of mind that our team are acting professionally and they're not carrying out behaviours that put other road users at risk. And, that kind of reassurance is priceless, really.